Test. It doesn't.
Güzellik ardında gözler beni tatlı gida.
Kwatini Kukomboka ceremony. And here's something funny. When drought comes, they bring water tanks.
Hello.
But from here it's good?
Yeah,
From here? Yeah,
yeah. But if you stay like that, so no one can hear you.
here nobody.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
We don't.
Hello.
Just here. He's just here.
Shall I get it closer?
Yeah, a little bit more maybe.
Can you hear me?
Hello.
No, no. So now.
This is better now. Good.
Now?
Good. Thank you.
Low.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we
2024 was a year of instability. "2024 was a year of instability, a year of extremes. It's set to be the hottest year on record. The challenge feels huge, yet solutions exist. Across cities, regions, businesses, schools, and community organizations the world over, bold climate action is underway in big and small but significant ways. Leaders of all kinds are stepping up and rising to the challenge. There's a groundswell of momentum. Climate action is possible, popular, and profitable. Thanks to the collaboration of organizations across the world, we know what is needed to tackle the climate crisis at speed and scale across oceans, regions, and industries. We now know where we need to go next, together, to build a healthy, resilient, prosperous, peaceful world for all of us and our children, to reach our clear collective climate goals by 2030. So, whoever you are, wherever you're from, find out more about the partners, impact makers ready to collaborate, and the tools already available to build ambitious national plans and take bold climate action today. Because tomorrow is too late.
Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to today's iLab, titled Scaling Resilience, Impact-Driven Partnerships for Food and Water Through Evidence and Innovation. My name is Yomna Al-Amri. I work as a policy manager at Abdulatif Jameel Poverty Action Lab at the Middle East and North Africa office, short for JPAL MENA, leading the agriculture, environment, energy, and climate change sectors, and JPAL's Air and Water Lab in Egypt, the hub of advanced policy innovation for the environment. It's a pleasure to gather here with passionate and committed individuals from diverse regions and sectors, all united in a shared vision. Today's session is a key part of the Marrakech Partnership for Global Climate Action at COP29, and we'll be exploring some of the most urgent questions in the field of climate resilience. Our focus will be on food and water resilience, particularly how global partnerships rooted in science and evidence and data and real-world innovation can create scalable solutions that can align with our NDCs and NAPs. This isn't just a discussion about what's possible, but about what's actionable and what can be implemented globally. I'd like to begin by introducing our esteemed panelists who bring diverse perspectives and expertise to the table. Representing research and academia, we have Dr. Ahmed Sayed, the Executive Director of JPAL MENA and Associate Professor of Economics at the American University in Cairo. We have Ms. Sharanya Chandran, Director of Policy and Communications at JPAL South Asia at IFMR. We have Dr. Hisham Al-Azlani, Lab Director at Ujala, or UM6B JPAL Agricultural Lab for Africa. We also have Dr. Maha Zorbi, Regional Researcher for Sustainable and Resilient Water Systems at the International Water Management Institute at the MENA office. Moving on to policymakers and academia, we have Dr. Riham Riz, the Director of the Egypt Impact Lab at the Egyptian Ministry of Planning, Economic Development and International Cooperation and JPAL MENA, and Associate Professor at the European Universities in Egypt. Representing the private sector, we have Mr. Ramel Azmamadov, founder of Dr. Agro, and last but definitely not least, representing civil society, we have Ms. Tule Lineye, Chief of Staff of AGRA. We also have Ms. Ingrid Timbowi joining us shortly, Deputy Executive Director and Senior Policy Lead at the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, or AGWA. Our topic today, food and water resilience, is undeniably one of the most pressing global challenges as we face these escalating climate risks. Worldwide, communities should have access to secure food and water sources. And this session will examine how we can develop, scale, and replicate resilient food solutions and water systems across different contexts. As we discussed today, let's keep in mind that scalability is key. We'll be exploring evidence-based solutions, approaches backed by data and research proven to be effective. With that thought in mind, I'd like to invite our first speaker to open our session. Dr. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Yomna, and good morning, everyone. Is it okay? Okay. It's a pleasure to be here today and contribute to the important discussion on how evidence can drive resilience in our food and water systems. I would like to start by thanking the Climate Champions team for the opportunity to host this implementation lab and extend our appreciation to Community Jameel for co-organizing this session with us. We have prepared like a small presentation to give you like an idea about what JPAL is about. We are a global research center that's mainly focused on conducting rigorous impact evaluations to address pressing issues around poverty and resilience. Over the years, we have been around for 21 years. We started in 2003. And since then, we have conducted more than 2,300 evaluations. Each of these dots represents an evaluation, and the different colors represents kind of like, different sectors or areas where we are working on. And as you can see, environment and energy is one of the key points. It's not only about research, but also scaling this up. So we have more than 600 million lives reached through scaling up of our different interventions and evaluations. You can check this out actually on our database on our website. We have got a database of evaluation summaries from implemented programs, and we have summarized 1,200 of those. With regard to our activities in the area of climate change, energy access, air and water, and these hot topics, we have two major initiatives out there. The first one is the King Climate Action Initiative, which started in 2020. And the mission of this one is to innovate, test, and scale evidence-informed climate solutions with policymakers worldwide. The main goal is to raise the standard for evidence of effectiveness in climate policy and reach at least 25 million people in poverty with effective mitigation and adaptation solutions by the year 2030, and to cut emissions in an amount equivalent to 125 million US dollars. This effort has extended recently and expanded to our regional air and water labs, which exist in three main continents, or three main areas. We have got one in Jebel Mena in Egypt, and we have one in Africa, and we have also one in South Asia. So the idea behind those is the three air and water labs have in mind the goal of co-generating evidence with governments that can influence policy and decision making. So with a closer look at the one in Egypt, the one we are representing here today together with our colleagues from India as well, who will speak about the air and water lab in India. The version of Egypt is called HABI, or the Hub of Advanced Policy Innovations for the Environment. HABI stands for we have been trying to be creative with the name. So HABI stands for the Ancient God of Nile in Egypt. So this regional air and water lab for the MENA region is based at Jebel Mena at the American University in Cairo, and we work jointly with the Egyptian government to co-generate evidence and shape policies targeting clean air and water access. Five main activities that we are focusing on. First, diagnosing the pressing problems. Second, share existing evidence on potential solutions, not necessarily from Egypt, but globally. And also enhance administrative data systems, the use of admin data to come up with solutions. And also test promising innovations using RCTs, or randomized control trials. And then later on, scale and monitor effective solutions. Next. So today we have three institutions from the JPAL network attending today, and will be sharing our insights and thoughts on how we work. We have JPAL MENA, or HABI, as I explained. We have our colleagues from South Asia will be explaining Sarwa, or Solutions and Advancement Through Research for Water and Air, which is the version of Air and Water Lab in South Asia. And we have also our colleagues from Ojala, which is the UM6P JPAL Agricultural Lab for Africa, which is based in Morocco. So what exactly we bring to this discussion? As a global research center, a network of research institutions and research labs globally represented. We aim at trying to help policymakers by evaluating programs to know what works best and scale up the evidence-based solutions and engage in collaborative multi-stakeholder collaborations for high-impact projects. The idea there is to try, we have got a lot of solutions out there. Which solution is more successful? Which solution is more cost-effective? This is something we try to test academically. This is hopefully will maximize the impact from the limited resources. And this would enable and contribute to the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, which aims to set a post-2025 climate finance agenda that's both needs-based and grounded in science as well. Yeah, I'm really hopeful for this discussion to be useful and engaging. And I hand it over now to Yomna. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed. Now we're going to start the first part of our roundtable. We're going to move forward with 3 different presentations from the JPAL offices that Dr. Ahmed just mentioned. Dr. Ahmed will start with the general global evidence that we have from JPAL collectively from all of the offices and give a hint about what we do at HAPI or HABI in Egypt. And then we'll move forward, of course, with Chandra from our office in South Asia, and then Dr. Hisham from Ojala. Dr. Ahmed, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Yomna. Thank you, Yomna. So just before digging deeper into the evidence, I would like to draw your attention to the technique that we are using. We are using randomized evaluations, or academically speaking, randomized controlled trials. It's something that we have borrowed from the medical sciences, where actually, in order to test the effectiveness of a particular drug, what you do is you conduct an experiment in a lab. We don't do this, we conduct an experiment, but in the field. So the idea is for what type of intervention, any type of intervention that you're interested in evaluating its effectiveness, you conduct a randomized evaluation by randomly assign this treatment to a bunch of beneficiaries, and then another group will be the control group. This randomness would enable you to, would ensure that the 2 groups are identical on almost everything, not only observable characteristics, but also unobservable characteristics. So that any difference that you find down the way after implementation of the program would be the causal impact of this technique. This is pretty much in the simplest form, what RCTs are about. What I'm going to do right now is to give you a snapshot from JPAL's evidence using this technique from different countries. So this is just one example of the 2,300 experiments or randomized evaluations that I've mentioned. So this one is in Niger, and it pretty much evaluates the impact of a technology in agriculture, a simple technology which is demi loans, which is shown below. Which is kind of a small half a circle kind of thing that can capture rainwater for 2 to 3 days and increase soil nutrient content and help with land restoration. Despite the effectiveness of this technique or this technology, only third of farmers adopted it, right? And the cost is not that high, which is really surprising. So we conducted an experiment to see if adaptive agriculture techniques work, but why farmers do not use them. Is it about knowledge, so that providing them with training could help? Is it credit constraints, so providing them with cash transfers would help? And how exactly we can frame these cash transfers? Should it be conditional or unconditional? So in order to do this, we have conducted an experiment where we have a comparison group, farmers receive nothing, versus treatment groups, different ones. One of them in which people just receive training on this technology, how exactly to use this kind of technology. The other one is training plus, so training plus providing them with unconditional cash transfer. And the third one is training plus conditional cash transfer, conditional on the quality of the demi loan constructed. Guess what? What worked like magic, the 3 of them work perfectly fine. If we look here at the control group, only 4% adopted this technology after the end of the experiment, which is like the case as it used to be. But the adoption rate increased to 94% for the training alone, 93% for the training plus conditional cash transfer, and 97% for training plus unconditional cash transfer. So at the end of the day, it's like the training that made a huge difference in this case. So you don't have to combine it with anything. Just like providing people with information about that would help a lot in adopting this technology. Next. It's not only about adopting the technology, but also the benefits behind this. So the technology itself, in this particular example, is sustainable. So 3 years after the intervention, farmers were still actively using this, and it had positive impacts down the road. So it had positive impacts on agricultural productivity with an increase of 80 to 90 kilograms in agricultural production, and also like profits. So it increased profits by $3 in the first year, with gains expected to persist and grow. Another example comes from Ethiopia, where technology was used to guide farmer practice through video screening. So researchers in our network found that combining traditional extension services with explanatory public video screening improved farmer knowledge and adoption of recommended practices. Before the intervention, on a scale from 1 to 5, targeted farmers were using only 1.4 of the available agricultural technologies. Like, this is the control group. In this case, people were receiving the traditional kind of like intervention or providing them with information, the extension services. But what we did in the treatment is combining this together with video screening of the different techniques. And what happened is there has been positive impact in terms of like, understanding this. So farmers targeted adopted 0.84 more practices, and the share of those who adopted all the 5 best practices increased by about 8.4% percentage points. And this had double the knowledge retention on how to implement the 5 practices. Another example from Kenya. In this one, we contacted farmers, mainly sugarcane farmers, using SMS reminders, which was aligned with the growing season, like providing them with information that's aligned in time. And this had positive impact in terms of the yields increased by 8% in the first round, but unfortunately it didn't continue, so it wasn't that persistent over the time. And a reason behind this is that the lack of alignment with local weather fluctuations. So in the future, actually, we should be designing this in a better way. However, it was one of the most cost-effective solutions out there. So the cost of the intervention was only 2 cents per SMS, but it had positive impact of about $43 and increase in the farmer revenues by $54. Very quickly, Egypt, we have just started happy this year. We haven't officially launched yet. We're going to launch soon, but we just started our discussions and activities and research activities. And we have 3 main areas for the time being as a starting point. So we have one about adaptation to climate change in Egypt, and we're asking the question of, are Egyptian farmers aware of the threat climate change exert on their lives, and how does providing information eventually could improve their adaptation strategies? The second one is mainly on the social impacts of carbon credits in the Egyptian agriculture sector. And we asked the question of what's the real socioeconomic impact of carbon offsets on emission and income of smallholder farmers, and what serves as a valid basis for comparing emissions reduction. The third one is mainly on incorporating cultural context into safe water interventions. And the project aims to study how the use of filtered water could result in increased adoption rates and improve health outcomes compared to conventional chlorinated water provision. So far, we have been focusing on 4 governorates/provinces in the country, up in the north and the middle, but we are expanding as well to the south. Yeah, with this actually
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed. Building on some of the remarks that Dr. Ahmed and the solutions that he just provided, some of them are actually scaled up after the first success. I think the example from Niger is now the researchers are working with the government in order to scale it up on a much bigger scale. So these are just some of the examples that we're trying to showcase, so that when we start with the roundtable questions, we'll show how we can scale this up, how this could be replicated from one region to the other. And this brings us to another region, South Asia. Chandra, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Yomna. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. And I think the roundtable format is very conducive to discussions. So much like Dr. Ahmad pointed out of what we're trying to do in JPAL MENA, Middle East, North Africa, JPAL South Asia is doing things very similarly in terms of our approach. So across 17 years, we've been working very closely with state governments in India, with over 20 state governments in India, with NGOs as well as private partners to really evaluate what works, what doesn't across sectors, and catalyze the scale up of evidence-based interventions. I think equally important is throwing light on what doesn't work, because a lot of that is also being financed today. So with that, I think some of the evidence that I'll present from India and Bangladesh is on climate resilient agriculture, which is really at the cusp of developing resilient food and water systems. The numbers don't look really great. So if you look at it, today India ranks 7th globally in terms of climate vulnerability. Extreme weather costs India, it's estimated across approximately 9 to 10 billion USD annually, affecting our local economies and food systems. If you look at the way our food and water security challenges today, 69% of India's population relies on agriculture for livelihoods. Bulk of it is small scale, so more at risk to climate risks. Half of our land is, at risk of extreme weather conditions like floods and droughts. And 62% of India's irrigation currently is actually through groundwater sources, which are at the risk of very, very fast depletion. So expected to triple by 2080, which are all pretty sobering statistics. So I think this just reiterates the importance and urgency of adapting and adopting climate smart technologies to reduce these vulnerabilities to climate shocks, but at the same time to promote long-term sustainability in agricultural practices, a goal that's very aligned to India's NDCs as under the Paris Agreement. So adaptation is one of the key pillars, building this resilience against impacts of climate shocks through climate resilient agriculture, water management, water resource management, and climate resilient infrastructure. So here, I think it's not obvious on that technologies exist, but what are the barriers to adoption? And that's pretty much where the question lies. And so here are just some highlights from some of what we found in developing some of these resilient agricultural systems to reduce farmers, that can, and if not adopted in a timely way, they can reduce farmers' input, investments, and incomes as well. So what has worked, a teaser of some of that evidence. So one example is on adapting climate resilient crops, which can reduce yield losses, increase agricultural investments and income. So this example is actually from Odisha in east of India, where researchers Dar et al. Partnered with IRI, the International Rice Research Institute, to evaluate the impact of flood tolerant rice varieties. So basically, this flood resilient gene was inserted into a very popular rice variety called Swarna, and this variety then became called Swarna Sub 1, which was prevalent in Odisha, and it made this resilient to flood submergence for about 2 to 3 weeks. Interestingly, it was a 2-year-long study. The first year was a flood year and the second wasn't. So the results were very exciting. They found a 10% overall increase in yields on average as compared to the control group across both the years. And also found that reduction in yield losses increased, there were reduction in the yield losses and it increased the farmers' revenue substantially. And more importantly, I think if you look at the behavioral changes across the farmers cultivated more land, increased the use of fertilizers, and improved the planting techniques, which also led to higher profits even when no flooding occurred. So there was no yield penalty in non-flood years, which makes it an exciting proposition. And now IRI is looking to scale this across multiple places in India. Similar impacts on adopting other technologies. Say in Bangladesh, we tested flood saline tolerant varieties of legumes, pulses, and oilseeds, and found similar impacts in terms of improved yields, profits, and agricultural investments by farmers. I think, again, two effective strategies to improve adoption of climate resilient varieties of crops. And here it is really how information is delivered and how knowledge is transferred to farmers on some of these technologies. So here, targeting extension to agro dealers and providing them with seeds led to increased farmer level adoption of the Swarna Savan rice variety by 56% compared to conventional extension approaches in Odisha. So this is interesting in the sense that when incentives for farmers and agro dealers, when they are well aligned, informing these private input suppliers has the potential to create a large impact in terms of farmers, small scale farmers adopting some of these climate resilient technologies. I think similarly in Bangladesh, the farmer demonstrations and social learning. So this is again a field of emerging, that needs to be investigated a lot more. But I think while demonstration at scale increases adoption, it is also important at the scale at which this demonstration happens. So the scale matters in terms of how it gets adopted. So demonstration to large groups of farmers and learning by doing on their own farms increases the adoption by about 6.5 percentage points. So I'll quickly, if in the next minute, I'll give you another interesting insight, which is around sometimes you need to look at the pricing of water, and just looking at some efficient irrigation technologies doesn't work. So for instance, in Andhra Pradesh, which is a southern Indian state, when farmers faced net zero additional charges for consuming more water, the adoption of drip irrigation did not lead to any reduction of overall water consumption. Instead, farmers actually diversified their crops to water intensive but more remunerative crops. And in contrast, in Bangladesh, where there is a price for more water consumption, they used 18% less water and a 7% increase in farm profit. So I think just the water pricing, that insight is important to look into, and just looking at efficient irrigation technologies might not work always. A quick teaser into what's next in terms of our research and scale agenda in India, which is through Sarva, which Dr. Ahmed mentioned. So here we're looking at collaborating with multiple governments, and this has been seed funded by Community Jameen. So 7 research projects in 6 states, and we have a collaboration with the Government of India as well, in the Jal Jeevan mission, the water mission. And we're piloting multiple solutions, diagnosing them across these 4-5 states currently, as we are also looking at scaling emissions trading markets in India, which for particulate matter pollution, which was evaluated in Gujarat and being scaled now in Maharashtra, tested in Maharashtra for another for SOx, and scaled more in Gujarat. So I think these are some of the exciting things. And as we go forward, we're going to be testing solutions on weather variability, what are some of the solutions like weather insurance, etc., and disaster, early warning systems that help manage disasters, early predictions, and so on. So I'll pause there and hand it back over to Yomna.
Thank you so much, Sharanya. I mean, it's interesting to see how some solutions work in some contexts and others don't. Sometimes it sounds very interesting and workable when we think about it, but reality is kind of different. And this is what's very exciting about our work. Sometimes we're very surprised with the results. So I'd like to have our final presentation from Dr. Hisham about the work you do at Ujala.
Thank you, Mna. Thank you, J. Palmena, also for organizing. Can you all hear me? Said great. Where Ujala is still a new lab. It's less than a year old, so we don't have any evidence to share with you proper. But we thought it was interesting to just present the model because it's pretty new in the JPALS galaxy. It's a private sector embedded lab. So I'll just. So as I said, Ujala is embedded with a private sector company. This is quite unusual because JPAL usually works with governments. We're working with the OCP, which is it's a Moroccan company. It's state-owned but run as a private sector, and it's the world's leading phosphate-based fertilizer soil solution provider. And what we do is evaluate OCP's scalable farmer-centric initiatives. And we're dedicated to advancing the continent's food security and small-scale farmer productivity, profitability, and resilience. In more details, we're supported by the OCP Foundation with a $10 million grant to fund research. And we work mainly with OCP Africa, which is the African subsidiary of OCP. So what we do is that we matchmake between JPAL's network of researchers and OCP local subsidiaries in Africa. There are more than 12 around the continent. And then we test and tweak OCP's farmer-centric activities in sub-Saharan Africa in order to maximize impact and cost effectiveness. So just as a background, OCP has many farmer-centric activities in Africa. This can be free soil testing or providing more holistic solutions like inputs and market linkage. And so we work around these solutions. And then we have a rolling RFP to fund RCTs addressing these emerging ag challenges. This can be low fertilizer usage, low resilience, information dissemination issues. And we favor cross-country studies because I think we will talk about this later, but we think that it's the best way to gather scalable insights. And we're very lucky in a way because OCP also has many farmer-centric activities across countries in Africa. And then at the end, we synthesize and disseminate through engagement with the public and private sector in order to facilitate scale-ups and co-financing, because at the end of the day, OCP is very much interested into bringing other allies into these farmer-centric activities. So just a quick words about why Africa and why OCP in particular. I just wanted to show this map because we usually don't see these maps with these projections. Africa is huge. So you can fit in China, the US, all of Europe and India. And it is home to 60% of the world's unused arable lands. So while we always hear about Africa's food security challenges, like 60% of the population facing moderate to severe food insecurity, very low yields, and being a net food importer, we believe that Africa has also a unique potential for not just food security, but also feeding the world. And this is super important in a context where arable land per capita is dwindling with 10 billion people on Earth by 2050. And this is important because it can also help with not just with the zero hunger objective, but also with the climate change objective. Because more and more studies are showing that resilient and sustainable farming practices also equal more carbon sequestration. And so we believe that Africa is a good place to do this evidence building work. And OCP is also a good partner for it, since it has been a leader of change in the continent for a while. Morocco has the world's largest reserves in phosphate. That's one of the 3 macronutrients that a plant needs or a crop needs to grow with nitrogen and potash. And so it is also an African player with a very, very big social footprint, and with all these farmer-centric initiatives already reaching 4 million farmers across the continent. And most importantly, it sees our lab as a powerful monitoring and evaluation mechanism and scale-up mechanism. And it's probably best illustrated by the fact that I'm actually wearing two hats. I'm also leading strategic initiatives for OCP in Africa and Asia. And so this was just, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do. We have just started with our first request for proposal, and we're hoping to share with you more evidence in next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hisham. Thank you to all the JPAL experts here for the insightful presentations. And so that we don't monopolize the conversation, I'd like to start the interactive roundtable and move away from JPAL affiliations and move to some of the other solutions that are out there that could be scaled up. I'd like to start with Dr. Maha Zouabi. If you can tell us a little bit about the work you do at the IWMI and the research that you conduct that helps drive policy forward.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here, actually presenting the International Water Management Institute. Maybe first I would love to give, like, to who don't know what's IMI. We are at the International Water Management Institute, a non-for-profit organization, do research for development. And we are under the CGR, our HQ in Sri Lanka, and we do work in 16 offices, national, regional, across global South Asia and Africa. Actually, this year is our 40th anniversary, and we just kicked off our next 6-year strategy. So please welcome to navigate and read our strategy. Our research focus on water availability and access, including adaptation to climate change, how water is used and how it can be used more productively, particularly in agriculture. So water equality and its relation to health, this is as well a focus we consider, and how it as well integrate with the environment and how society can govern their water resources. So some examples, but I wanted to stress that all of our work is demand driven. So we do work with government, private sector, NGOs, even we do support a lot of youth entrepreneurs. So an example of what we've been doing, for example, solar powered irrigation system. So we had a long lead in addressing water, energy, food nexus by advocating the solar pumps. Like we showed how solar irrigation can help mitigate water scarcity and enhance resilience to drought in developing countries. Example in Ethiopia, where IMI carried out a detailed solar suitability mapping to identify areas where solar irrigation would be most effective, allowing governments and companies to target the right locations for solar irrigation projects. A second example, a water accounting tool. For example, in Morocco, to tackle the pressing challenge of water scarcity in Morocco, particularly in Souss Massa, where it's the most demand water for agriculture there. So IMI, in collaboration with partners, local government, we designed an online water accounting dashboard, which offers stakeholders a sophisticated yet user-friendly visualization tool designed to monitor the current and future status, trends of water resources. So the dashboard provides baseline data, insights, and future projections, enabling stakeholders to make informed decisions about water availability and use. And currently, we are working with the local government in Morocco, even to scale this tool for other basins. Third example is water use for agriculture, particularly focused on MENA region, where like Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and Morocco, like example in Lebanon, we just concluded the water reuse standards in agriculture in Lebanon. The government now in the process of endorsement the standards where that would help them for a better water management for these scarce resources. In Morocco, we are currently working with the government to develop a water use cost-benefit analysis methodology to support the government in implementing and design their related projects and initiatives when it comes to water use. Finally, example from Egypt, we just concluded a water and salinity roadmap for Egypt using remote sensing data, GIS data, water sampling, soil sampling, consultation, focus group discussions, surveys, maps, mapping the best practices, the socioeconomic factors with gender nexus as well. So the roadmap came up with some recommendation for the government, we need to promote best practices. There have been always great practices in Egypt that need to be promoted through dissemination, extension services, farmer cooperatives, etc. Improving water use efficiency through precision irrigation technology, water saving practices. The third conclusion, cultivating soil tolerant crops by developing and introducing enhanced varieties through research and breeding programs. The fourth one, infrastructure development. There is a need to enhance irrigation and drainage systems and investing in storage facility. And the fifth one, strengthening the institutional structure and the governance of the saline landscape, as we have different players there. So in conclusion, EME plays a pivotal role in addressing a global water challenge, leveraging innovative solutions like solar-powered irrigation, smart water management tools, wastewater use, enhanced resilience in developing countries. So through our research and scalable solutions, we continue to advance water and land management practices that enhance food security at the end and reduce poverty and protect the environment. So as we continue and celebrate our 40th anniversary, its ongoing commitment for sustainable water management remains integral to the addressing and the urgent challenge posed by the climate change and resources scarcity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to move to Ingrid. Thank you, Ingrid, for joining us. From your perspective, working in policy, what kind of frameworks can support scalable community-driven solutions in the water and agriculture field?
Yes, thank you so much. And thanks to the colleagues from JPAL MENA for inviting me here today. My name is Ingrid Timbo, and I work for an organization called the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, or AGWA, much easier to remember. And we are a global network of researchers, people working on policy, people working, engineers, technical folks, but also lawyers and really anyone who's working in the water and climate space is welcome to join our global network. I lead our policy work, which is focused primarily on the integration of water into things like NDCs and NAPs. And so what I'm going to talk about here very briefly is a little bit upstream of the projects that have been discussed here. But how do we kind of connect all of this amazing work that's going on the ground to national climate planning? Because a lot of times there's a massive disconnect between these things. And so along with several partners, about three and a half years ago, we started a new project called the Water Tracker for National Climate Resilience. And this is a project that works with national governments on looking at how water is integrated across different plans. So looking at an NDC and NAP if a country has one, but also looking at national development plans, sectoral plans, et cetera, at the national level on how kind of water is or is not integrated well into those. And then from there, there's a bunch of key questions that come out of that, but really looking at how countries can set up the best enabling environment for water resilient climate action, and how can we connect all of these projects and programs across sectors and avoid bad investments and maladaptation. Actually, EME is one of our main partners on this project. We are also working with ARUP and Deltaris in the Netherlands, and a range of other folks who are looking at this from a variety of different angles. Obviously, we come in from kind of the project tools and approaches angle, but EME brings all of their researchers and all of the work that they're doing on the ground. And that phase of this work is starting just this year. So very exciting. If you'd like to learn more about that, you can go to www.watertracker.cc. I'm also happy to share more information about that project, but really looking at kind of connecting the work that you all are doing. And actually, Egypt was one of the first countries that we worked with on this. We also worked with the Palestinian Water Authority as well, and looking at expanding it into Jordan and Morocco over the next year potentially as well. So lots happening in the MENA region, but we're also global. So yeah, if you'd like to learn more, I'm happy to share more later. Thank you.
Very interesting. Thank you, Ingrid. And we'll expand on how we can align this with policies or bigger picture in the next section, but I'd like to move to the private sector and get their perspective on how we can bring together these solutions. Usually we work with community organizations, we work with governments, but also the private sector has a big role to play here. So from your perspective, I'd like to ask you about which factors you consider critical when deciding to invest in a scalable resilience project in specific.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate for this event, and I'm proud to my country host this kind of event. And I would like to appreciate high-level climate champions to select me as the impact maker. And briefly, I would like to talk about my project, Dr. Agro. It's an open platform for the farmers. We started 8 years ago. We work with the farmers. We recognize that some problems and some solutions can be addressed in the online platform. We move our solutions and the services to the online platform, and farmer register. They're using our platform database for the calculation of the crop and planning their plans and etc. For coming to investment, besides for the startup, I represent one of the agricultural holdings in Azerbaijan. Of course, when we start investing the projects, we of course first start checking the financial details, but this is not all. We have to check the environmental aspects as well, because agriculture and the environment is interconnecting each other, because agriculture affecting the environment, and climate change is also affecting the agriculture. So it's not because of we are sensitive for the environment, but it's because of the gene and DNA of the agriculture. We have to pay attention to the effect of the environment. So that's why when we check the opportunities in the investment for the agriculture projects, we always look at the environmental details as well.
Thank you so much, Ramil. I'd like to move to Tule. Can you just give us a brief background on your organization, and at the same time, if you can share with us some of the structures or tools that have proven effective to scale community-based solutions, also giving the perspective of grassroots and community solutions here. Thank you.
Thank you, Yomna. And at AGRA, we're an African-based institution. We're not quite a civil society organization. We are an organization that provide the very beginning end of catalytic funding to SMEs, to community-based organizations as well as governments to ensure that we create the appropriate policy environment for both effective or more resilient food systems. Whilst we haven't really looked closely at water, we've tried to ensure that we are creating a more holistic environment for how food systems are then become more resilient, especially in our 12 countries. We're in 12 countries just on the continent, and I'm happy to hear someone from your Ujala platform is here. We work quite closely with UM6P, and it would be great to then have continued conversations on how to implement the platforms that they're looking at, because we have in our new strategy are looking specifically at youth as well as climate resilience in food systems. And a lot of the focus will be on digital interventions to ensure that, one, they remain in food systems, but also support their communities become more resilient. What we have found is that a lot of our work that gets translated into community level ownership has had the most effectiveness. I see Dr. Ahmed. Yeah, Dr. Ahmed presented, similar to the work that AGRA has done. Any of the work we have provided or grants that we provided to community-based organizations, we have seen a lot more effectiveness. But then also partnering with government to ensure the policies don't undermine the work that they're doing. And so it's not, for us, it's not a single-pronged approach. It must be multi-pronged. But we also ensure that we create capacity for village-based advisors, for example, using digital platforms, information, as well as providing incentives. I think we see a lot of disincentives from our government sometimes come through, and we try and ensure that those are mitigated. So it's continual work, and I think for us it continues to evolve, and we're continuously looking to learn from partners such as JPEL. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tule. So this is a great transition to the Voice of Youth. So we have Michael Kakande to represent Resilient 40, which is a youth network hoping to bring forward the name of the voice of youth in the climate action discussion.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Omna. You're privileged to be here. I'm Michael Kakande from the Resilient 40, which is an African youth climate action network spanning across 30 African countries. And currently, the youth cluster lead under the Non-State Actors Steering Committee under the African Union, meaning we more or less channel youth African voices within decision making. And well, it's always interesting to be at such tables and hear very interesting initiatives. And ours is trying to see how we can channel these to young people within communities. And I think we were blessed that was I'm forgetting, but it was COP27 in Egypt, where we launched what we call, climate cafes. And currently we run 846 climate cafes across 38 African countries. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to bring about, these are more or less safe spaces we've created on the continent, for young people as well as their communities to engage, at a community level for sense of ownership of these projects. And all in all, trying to build the resilience that they, clearly need when it comes to food security, more or less water. So, giving examples of course, we know areas like the MENA, literally holding 1.4, or less, natural water resources, making these areas really, very prone to, climate change, more or less, even within other areas of Africa, let's say East Africa, Southern Africa, where we may still have access to, some little bit of water, let's say East Africa, we still have issues with food, insecurity. So the question has been on, there's been a very big gap when it comes to very amazing initiatives we do at the upscale here, but seeing little of that trickle down to communities. So we more or less came in to try to see how we can bridge the existing gaps by empowering young people to take up these spaces and of course influence policy. So for us, the climate cafes we run, and we've been running what we call the African Climate Justice Caravan since 2021. We are very known as noisemakers. So we bring all these voices from ground of these young people, having these amazing initiatives and, throw that to our policymakers at national levels. And of course, with the oncoming NDC reviews probably early next year and all these other NDC reviews that have been happening, we work alongside line ministries to see that youth voices and, initiatives and innovations are clearly, captured within these processes, just so I come from Africa where it's a very, very young continent. And sometimes I'm blown away with the different places I'm at and I see all these amazing initiatives. So we are more or less trying to create such an environment where with all these amazing initiatives, we have this trickle down to the very young people that are that innovative and willing to bring about a change within their communities, of course, because ours is trying to, build, climate resilience that we so much need, within our communities to, to help with the, with the so much that is currently running out of hands. And, so we are privileged to be doing this within, our key frontline communities across the continent. And there's so much I can go over, but I'll quickly push this back to you. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for telling us about the great work you're doing. I'd like to drive the conversation back to how to turn research into reality. So, Dr. Ahmed, you mentioned how to scale solutions, and I'd like to expand on that. How exactly do we scale up solutions with working with governments? So I'd like to hear from you and from Dr. Riham on what are the main elements of the scalability framework that we work on and how we can use some of the great solutions that we mentioned here in different contexts and what makes it work and what makes it doesn't. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll get started very quickly and shortly, and then hand it over to Riham, given that she has much more experience and hands-on work within the government and within JPAL as a bridge between the two worlds, the world of academia and research, and also the Ministry of Planning and Policy Making. So in terms of scaling up, I think let's take one step back and saying the success of these interventions in the first place would require understanding from the different players. We are not only working with the government, we're also working with NGOs, the private sector, as Hisham described, and many other players out there. And in order to succeed, as a first step, you need to build this culture, or at least try to convince people that impact evaluation and rigorous evidence is in their favor. Mainly because you will be saving a lot of resources, you will be knowledgeable about what works and what doesn't work, and under which circumstances it could work or doesn't work. And the biggest challenge we encounter there is pretty much resistance to change, kind of. So people know, we encounter this at different levels, from small NGOs all the way to big ministries and policymakers at the ministerial level. They understand what they know, or they think they know what they do, and they do not need evidence for that. So this is a little bit tricky and difficult, and I believe for Riham, this is a large part of her portfolio, just to try to get in many players there. We have been successful with this model, mainly because we are embedding a lab in the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, so that we are part of this ecosystem of the government, and the fact that we are bringing in impact evaluations and rigorous scientific evidence is something that is kind of integrated in the ecosystem. And I believe this is key for success in the first place, so that we can scale it up. One important thing as a main barrier for scaling up is also community engagement. Community engagement is important. I have a lot of discussions, particularly when it comes to food and water issues. I have a lot of discussions with NGOs working in this area. And in a country like Egypt, for example, which is water scarce, in the summertime, we have rice as the main crop in most of the regions up in the north. And as you all know, rice needs a lot of water, right? And the country is poor in water. So what happened back in the time is the government comes and puts kind of a cap on cultivating rice. They say go for anything else, go for maize, go for anything, but not rice. But actually, matter of fact, people need rice because it's a main ingredient in the food of Egyptians, as it is the case across the MENA region. So right now, there's a lot of advancement, as Shrania explained, in different variants of different rice crops or different variants of the rice. However, they're not as popular. People are still waiting for the rice as they know, mainly because of the taste or different reasons. And that's why actually these solutions are not very sustainable. So actually, we need advancement on both sides. On the technological side that make variant as close as the natural rice, but also kind of understanding from the different communities, not only the farmers, but also the final producer or final consumers that you would need this, and this is a more persistent or sustainable solution in order to have rice on your table for a longer period of time. Otherwise, you are also encountering the challenge of not finding water at one point. So this is just one example of a main challenge that we encounter, the engagement of the community there. I leave it to Riham to talk more about the Egypt Impact Lab and her struggles in this side.
Thank you, Ahmed. I think before jumping into what is scalable and what is not, and sharing the experiences that we are currently facing, I think the first thing I'd love to follow what Sharani has just done in her presentation by giving you some insights on the pressing challenges that facing water and food security in Egypt, as presented in the National Climate Change Strategy for Egypt that has been launched in 2022. Egypt water, the first pressing challenge is Egypt water resources crisis with downstream countries. It leads to reduced water availability, increased water salinity, and water stress. And also, when we talk about water scarcity and water salinity now has been expanded to the most productive lands in Egypt, which is the New Delta. Egypt recently as well is facing several weather phenomena such as storms, high temperature, rising sea levels. In addition of the land fragmentation, limited availability of urban lands, lack of access to finance for small farmers, as I've just mentioned, those are actually the main challenges that facing those sectors in Egypt as presented in the National Climate Change Strategy. Also, coming to the consequences of those main challenges, Egypt actually we can list the consequences in two main buckets here: poor food safety and poor food quality. For poor food safety, Egypt is among the top middle income countries who are suffering from high share of productivity loss due to unsafe food. Also, for the poor food quality, as the statistics always show, that the contribution of the agri sector to both employment and total exports are really very limited. Egypt has a relatively low share of agri-food processing. This is actually lead us to the final conclusion of lacking of knowledge for small farmers to use modern farming and irrigation systems in order to be able to contain the water and the food insecurity. So coming, Yumna, to your question about evidences and what is scalable and what's not, and the how, and how to make this scalable when in our discussions and negotiation with the policy. I just would love to mention that my colleagues at JPAL, they are doing a very, in their presentation, they are actually present a very impressive findings that actually can be scaled or can be implemented in different LMICs countries, because all the countries, I think India, Egypt, Africa, they are sharing the same pressing challenges in both sectors, water and food. And most of those countries as well, the small farmers are acquainted with traditional agriculture techniques, and they are still acquainted to the irrigation system that they get used to. So what we see actually across the different evidences that they share, that training, SMEs, information and knowledge could have a sustainable impact on a sustainable positive impact on yield, productivity, and the profits that acquired by farmers, even after 3 years from implementation of the program. I think all the programs that my colleagues have just presented can be scaled, but how? When it comes to how here, actually, I would love to share my experience as a director of the Egypt Impact Lab. The first thing that we need to to go through is embedding research in the policy framework. Well, this is how we do under the Egypt Impact Lab. It's an initiative between JPAL, MENA, and the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development as a host ministry. However, we are working with different strategic government partners like the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Education and Social Solidarity. I think what I mean here by having an embedded staff, embedded team, and being in structure and the government, that we understand more about the learning agenda of the government, and we try to commission research into this policy framework in order to make sure that is impactful. It's really very important from the beginning to involve policymakers at every step, from the evaluation design till the dissemination results. This is actually gives us as a researchers constant feedback on the solutions that we are implementing, and make sure that those solutions can be actionable into the local context, which easily can be scalable later on. Also creating this rapport and support and trust between researchers and the government. We do it always using leveraging on the admin data by producing a very quick formative research, needs assessment, diagnosis, analysis, for them to know the current context, for us to know if those programs are acceptable or not, and if yes, they are potential to scale or not. I think this is also in addition to the capacity building workshops that we always do with the government partners and the regular check-ins in order to be able to ensure also seeding the culture of using evidence and data in policy making decisions. I think this is the main criteria that we use under the Egypt Impact Lab in order to make sure that those programs can have their potential to scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Riham. I'd like to have a follow-up on that. A lot of the research that we do at JPAL is mainly micro level. How can we, from your perspective as someone bridging the gap between research and policy making, how can this fit into the macro level of policy making that the governments need in order to be able to expand these kinds of successful solutions and align it with the NDCs and the NAPs?
Yumna, I think the main there is no a correct answer for this, but I think the answer here is try to align goals and objectives from the beginning, try to commission research into their agenda, getting them on the negotiation table, understand their pressing priorities, because this is the main challenge with dealing with policy makers. As we know, dealing with policymakers, they always need immediate solutions, but you know that research, it's a time-intensive process. So setting goals from the beginning, aligning these goals with them, trying to do a quick wins by doing a pilots with and encouraging multi-stakeholders, private sector and NGOs in order to test the effectiveness of the interventions that we want to work with them on, and giving them some insights. And this is done under their supervision. This is something that makes our life easier later on by going to the scale roadmap for those projects. Also, I think this is something that we already did last year, but not under the climate aspect, but for the social protection, is the South-South learning trips. It's inviting our government policymakers and travel with them to one of the countries that facing the same pressing climate change risks that Egypt is facing, but they have like programs that is related to conserving water or using modern agriculture techniques, which make them learn from these experiences, and later on they want to adapt it in their local context. This is something that is already we do it, but again, trying to build a trust and rapport between the researchers and the government. This is actually also require building this evaluation culture within the government context. Well, this is something that we always do through capacity building. we tailor different types of programs according to the seniority and the knowledge of the policymakers we are dealing with in order to be able to establish a common language that is related to evaluation and using evidence in policymaking decision. Along the way as well, we work with them to use their data to make it dashboardable, readable, and actually this is something that we are really concerned under the Egypt Impact Lab to once we have this big data accessibility, we can start to use the AI for targeting and getting to targeting local communities with certain interventions and help them tracking the progress of the programs and the national programs that you're currently working on. This is, I think, some of the tips that we apply when dealing with the government.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Riham. And I think to add to that point on the data and the dashboard, one of the things that we're trying to also do is to use the administrative data, like you said before, to guide our research questions. So it's not just one way, it's they give us the data and we give them the results of the data that we have. And it's an exchange of basically evidence in order to collectively be able to reach the goals of the climate agenda. And this brings me to private sector partnerships. I'd like to move to Dr. Hisham, if you can tell us about the model of how to work with the private sector, not just with policymakers. I think Tule also hinted at that we have to work collectively, all the stakeholders together, in order to be able to reach the agenda. That it's very hard to think that we're going to be able to do it in the coming a few years. Over to you.
Thank you, Yumna. I think that public-private partnerships are very important, instrumental in scaling projects, especially across sub-Saharan Africa. I want to talk about a specific example from my experience working at OCP, actually. I want to highlight the example of soil fertility maps. Soil mapping, to me, has been one of the most transformative research interventions that were picked up later by the private sector and that led to very important advancements in yield and overall social benefits. So I would like to talk about Ethiopia maybe as one of the success stories. So in Ethiopia, it used to be that farmers would use blanket formulas for as a fertilizer. It's a subsidized fertilizer. So OCP provided some support to do the soil fertility map amongst other stakeholders, and it led to the development of the soil fertility map of Ethiopia, and then a customized formula by OCP for Ethiopian soils, which has more of a micronutrients that is very lacking in Ethiopia, which is sulfur. And so this formula was actually, this fertilizer was actually 30% cheaper than what was being used before, led to higher yields and also more resilience because you had less nitrogen application, so no soil atrophication or less soil atrophication, and more carbon sequestration because you have healthier soils. So the result is that OCP has been was awarded the Ethiopian tender for 5 or 6 years straight. But most importantly, the Ethiopian market for fertilizer doubled, which means that the consumption also of the Ethiopian farmer was more important. And this is why we're trying to reach, because the average application rates in sub-Saharan Africa are still very low, which leads to quite low yield. So yeah, in my opinion, those are very important partnerships, and they are key for moving the needle in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you.
Yumna, if I can add.
Yes, please.
If that's okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I mean, as Agro, we supported the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit, and big partnership with OCP. But what we've been advocating for now is looking at private sector, public sector, and philanthropy working together to create more digital public goods. The soil health issue is not just prevalent in Ethiopia, it's an issue in Kenya, it's an issue in West Africa as well as in Southern Africa. So how do we incentivize private sector with the support of public sector to make sure that information like that is available for everyone and accessible to the farmers in particular, and allows, let's say, nutrient providers to then be able to effectively invest for each of the countries. But I think I see a similar issue with water. If we're talking about water here, how do we then ensure there's a more integrated and multi-sectoral look at how we ensure food systems are not only water resilient or climate resilient, but just generally resilient and more productive? So it'd be interesting to hear JPAL's perspective. Sorry, I'm taking over moderation. On what are the opportunities you're seeing? I mean, for AGRA, we support the startups, the really small end, and would like to see a lot more of the movement into scaling and availability across the continent, knowing that there are different contextual requirements. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jule. So I'd like to move to Sharonia. Hello. So building on that point, how can we scale up solutions from one context to the other? Do you have any examples that you can share with us of solutions on the ground that we were able to tinker with or change a bit in order to fit in other contexts?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think since the evidence on water food systems is a little bit more emerging, and that's the reason we have all of these research initiatives and new research collaborations with governments, which with the potential to scale and with the idea of scale, I think we need to look at how it happened in other sectors. For instance, in BRAC's graduation approach is one example where it was an NGO-led model tried in the communities, tested multiple in 7 countries simultaneously. Which is a luxury you don't have for multiple interventions, but in this case we did. And then I think we have, over the past about 8 years, worked with different governments in India because Banthan NGO brought it to India and replicated it and tested it for impact. And now we are working with the government of Bihar over the past 8 years to actually institutionalize it within the government. So here, I think JPAL's generalizability framework is really helpful. What are the key evidence-based components which will translate across contexts? And there has to be a policy pilot that we typically start with to even understand what the local conditions of another context look like. And then there is a mapping across the theory of change. So in terms of what are the key things that you would not compromise on when looking at another context, and if that context is, if the problem that problem exists, and if the context will lend itself to this. So I think that is the sort of thing that we do. The closest example of this is, I think it also requires the coalition of partners coming together. So Rahim said it is important for dedicated policy teams to be able to bridge that gap between research policymakers. And I think when you talk about sectors such as this, where the government is just such an important stakeholder, the example that I was giving on emissions trading for particulate matter pollution in Gujarat. So now that's one example where industries have to come together. Sensitization workshops have to happen for that. The government has to come together as the regulator. There has to be the tech enablement by the private sector, the platform on which this trading happens on, cap and trade markets. There has to be the coming together of philanthropy, which kickstarts this collaboration. And there's a lot of demonstration that's needed in the process for policy pilots. So now we have an initiative called Aspire, which is the Alliance for Scaling Policy Impact. So we're crowding in donors to actually support this scale up startup of interventions, because I think that's a space which governments don't invest in organically, which is surprising, but it's true. So I think those are some of the things that we have to be mindful of. And now, for instance, the emissions trading for particulate matter pollution, now 2 other states are looking at it. So it's going statewide in Gujarat, and Maharashtra is going to be piloting it for another pollutant, which is sulfur dioxide. So I think that's been a bit of the learning so far.
Okay, thank you so much. I think it's clear now that data has a big role to play here, and this particular sector, environmental issues, we lack a lot of evidence when it comes to what works and what doesn't, because we don't have a lot of time. We have to work fast because we're feeling the effects of what's happening right now, and And one of the challenges that we face every day is we want to expand, but we're not sure if this is going to work or not. So we have to collaborate with a lot of other entities apart from JPAL in order to get as many data as we can so that we collectively have the perspective of youth, we have community organizations, we have policymakers in order to be able to do that. So one final question I want to ask, and this is open to anyone from the roundtable, about MRV systems. How can we align this with the measurement, reporting, and verification systems that we have supposedly in order to be able to reach our NDCs? So we have all of these data, and we need in order to report on that and be able to, for each country to say, okay, I was able to reach my goal, I wasn't able to reach my goal. How can we just bring collectively all of this effort into one and be able to report on it, and based on that, change what's happening and be able to adapt and at the same time to mitigate future risks? The floor is open to who wants to start. Yeah, maybe Riham.
I think in order to be able to drive a change in this aspect, we have to define the problem. We should have data. It's not about not having data, but the data actually are silos. We have a very huge data, remote sensing data when it comes to weather, when it comes to usage of water, also the weather forecasts. And this is something that we already discover in dealing with the government. The point is the integration of this data into the MRV system. As you know, that MRV system, it's a data intensive process. So I think making this data looks to each other, not working silos, actually at the end of the story, the end users, which are maybe the policymakers at one edge and the farmers at the other edge as well, they might know more. But this is something that actually can lead to a good reporting and more insightful actions rather than just reporting on the metrics that already been determined in the NDCs, for example. This is because most of the countries, what they care about is tracking the progress that took place, that they already setting at their NDCs. However, going beyond this, if we try to incorporate the RCTs or the evaluations into this, we might actually jump into outcomes like yield productivity, like water conservation, insights that actually can lead on to initiatives that could reduce the problem that we are currently facing. I think this is what I have. Thank you.
Yeah, I can build on this and also mention something about the use of this data, not only for the sake of data itself and learning, which is important in itself, but also in a way to be able to design kind of maybe rigorous impact evaluations using this data. So actually this data could be helpful, not only to give us kind of insights in a descriptive way, but also to dig deeper into those and try to understand the causal links so that we are more able to identify what type of policies that would be more successful. And by this, actually, we can save a lot on the resources and achieve our goals in a much faster way. This is one thing. Another thing is the kind of generalizability framework. So we'll not be able to do impact evaluations for every single project, for example, but we can learn from each other. So actually and this is and evidence for this, this kind of discussions from different regions, from different institutions and from different sectors, the private sector, public sector, NGOs. I believe we can learn from each other and we can move the evidence that we generate from different regions to the hands of policymakers in other regions so that we can learn from each other. It doesn't necessarily replicate 100%, but at least some components there could be insightful for policymakers all over the globe so that we can learn from each other and support each other with knowledge.
So I think exactly what Rehem and Dr. Ahmed said. Looking at data systems and continuous monitoring is super important. So we've had a lot of discussion on evaluations, which is really answering, are we doing the right things? But then the next step when you scale up some of these is, are we doing things right? once you've decided what things you have to do. So I think just in terms of some examples, the continuous emissions monitoring system formed a basis for even evaluating a cap and trade market for particulate matter pollution. So somebody has to invest in that. You can't just invest in technologies. You have to also invest in monitoring systems. So that's one example. We used satellite data to monitor crop residue burning, which fields are burning. So that's a much like easier way. You cannot get to, and then we had to back check for accuracy a percentage. But these are available systems. So I think one should encourage, for instance, now flood forecast monitoring of Google is helping, and that's being evaluated in some places. So I think not duplicating existing efforts just because they are existing. So how you plug in monitoring evaluation in some of these efforts would be really important. And I think this the other thing is on inclusivity, and because climate change affects different people differently, and how can the data capture those differences intelligibly to inform policy action is also something that MRV systems should definitely be sensitive about.
Thank you so much, Sharanya. Dr. Maha?
It's not only about like monitoring and evaluation. We need as well to be adaptive in our learning. So just as well, like pause and reflect. This is very important. Either a milestone after a project or a programs. And as Dr. Ahmed mentioned, like we need to be as well learning from each other. So scalability requires like more into understand and be adaptive in our way of designing programs, a project, and to be as well align with the national as well monitoring plans sometimes. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maha. I think we're almost out of time, but before we close this roundtable, I'd like to just give a call to action. What's next? So we presented all of these interventions. Some worked, some didn't work. Some worked in one area and then it didn't work in another. And it's not just about what works and what doesn't. Is it worth it? Because you have to measure cost effectiveness and see if it's going to be worth the investment or not. Because some of these policies, when you try to expand it across nations, it could be very costly compared to other technologies or other interventions that could be more worth your effort and time and money. So I'd like to just offer everyone the chance to network after the event, and please reach out. Would love to share what we've learned. Would love to learn from you about what you've learned. And one of the biggest things we do at JPAL, I mean, I'm from the policy team, so basically what we do is try to push forward all of these into policy, actual policy, and bigger scale solutions across the different countries, and would love to talk to you about how we can do that. So please reach out, and if there's anything that we could work together, please don't hesitate. You'll find my email at the end of the presentation. And I'd like to thank you all for such an inspirational discussion. Each perspective provided a piece of the puzzle. So thank you so much for everyone here. And I hope we get to work with you soon. And I really hope we can do what we aim to do here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.